you. And thanks again for being here and listening. And I'm so pleased to be here. So thank you for inviting me. Okay, so as Darius said, let's talk about the medical physicist outside of radiotherapy. I just need to acknowledge, like was covered yesterday, that I'm here. I'm supported by the International Atomic Energy Agency Technical Cooperation Project, Paul N09027. So I thank the IAEA for supporting this. So where do medical physicists work? Well, of course, we know there's plenty of medical physicists in radiotherapy. We may also know that there are medical physicists who work in radiation safety and in nuclear medicine and radiology. And there are other areas where you might find medical physicists as well. I've shown this diagram as a triangle just to try and represent that most medical physicists are working in radiotherapy and probably the least internationally are working in radiology. We're not going to talk about the radiotherapy physicists today because I think we all know what they do. So I think, first of all, obviously we have a mixed audience here, so it's important to define what the medical physicist is. So they're an expert who can give advice on radiation physics applied to medical exposures. And this comes from the Euratom Council Directive. And of course, what you're seeing here, this is just medical physicists generally. Okay, so this would be radiotherapy and other specialisms too. What is a medical physicist? We can also look in the IAEA document that I show here, and it says that their primary role is to optimize the use of radiation to ensure safety and quality of diagnostic and therapeutic procedures, and to help establish policies, guidelines, and measurements for the determination of patient dose. So I think I've highlighted the term patient here. The medical physicist is more focused on the patient than necessarily the staff within departments. And they will collect and analyze clinical physics data for diagnosis or treatment of diseases. So I said, beyond radiotherapy, probably the biggest area we know medical physicists work are in radiation safety. And we know we have our radiation protection officers. And I think it's important to know that radiation protection officers are usually medical physicists or can often be medical physicists. And in fact, all medical physicists, be they working in radiation safety or in nuclear medicine or radiology or radiotherapy, they will take some responsibility for radiation protection because it's an area they know and have expertise in. We know that actually the radiation protection officers will take a lead. So if medical physicists are supporting radiation safety, they will fall under the main radiation protection officer. And radiation protection officer, of course, if you want to become one of these, you often require specific training and certification to become an RPO. As I said, many medical physicists are also RPO certified. Why do we need an RPO? I think in this audience, hopefully we all know it is defined in the IAEA basic safety standards that an RPO needs to be in place if you're dealing with radioactive materials or to deal with radiation protection more generally. So the need for an RPO, of course, an organization are the people who ultimately hold the responsibility of radiation safety, and they will appoint a radiation protection committee, including stakeholders, which might include medical physicists, radiologists, radiotherapists, and other users. And we know that the RPO really are the people who are going to oversee the application of radiation safety standards within the organization. Their responsibilities are to deal with regulations, to serve as the primary contact to regulatory agencies, to notify regulators of any changes in the practice, to monitor compliance and licensing within their organisation, and also to be aware of any changes that the regulations might bring in and give advice based on that. As I said, they will chair the Radiation Safety Committee often. They will oversee and coordinate radiation safety programmes. They will be involved in installation and design of radiological departments and scanners and radiotherapy machines and such like. And they will establish and oversee operating safety and emergency procedures and, of course, implement a culture of as low as reasonably achievable and be involved with training. Their third role will be to monitor and review what's happening. They will monitor occupationally exposed personnel. They will review the radiation protection programme within the organisation and its content. They will do surveys of the environment. They will be involved in leak tests if you're handling radioactive substances. And of course, they will identify any problems and stop any unsafe practices. So I think I mentioned this a little bit a few slides ago. If we're looking at radiation safety within the hospital, the radiation protection officer and the medical physicist or the medical physics expert have slightly different roles. The radiation protection officer will be concerned with the staff and public safety, where the medical physics expert will be more interested in patient safety. But of course, these distinctions aren't always clear, so there will be overlaps, and the medical physics experts will routinely talk to their radiation protection officers to make sure that the radiation use is safe within the hospital. Okay, so the next biggest group was nuclear medicine and followed by radiology, and I think we can group them together when we think about what these medical physicists will be doing in these specialisms. Again, I'm pointing to this IAA document which explains the role of a medical physicist. So they will be involved in the installation, design, technical specification, acceptance, commissioning and maintenance of equipment. They will be involved in radiation safety of patients, staff and the general public. They will support radiation dosimetry. They will optimize the physical aspects of medical procedures. So we're going to go through each of these in more detail in a few moments. They will be involved in the quality management of the physical and technical aspects of the nuclear medicine and the radiology service. And they will collaborate with other clinical professionals as key team members to make sure that the use of ionizing radiation is appropriate and safe. I'm showing this in a slightly different way now. This is the erratum description of what a medical physics expert does. So it's the specification, installation, design, acceptance testing and quality control, radiation protection, investigating incidents, that's something we haven't mentioned yet, optimization, surveillance, quality assurance of your procedures, and we saw some presentations on that yesterday. And of course, training and development involved with the use of ionizing radiation. So let's look at each of those spokes of the wheel individually. So we'll start with the specification and design of departments. So we know that if we have a radiological installation or a nuclear medicine installation, we need to put in specific radiation protection measures in place, be it shielding. We need to understand the occupancy of staff in various areas. So when we're designing a department in radiology or nuclear medicine, it's normally performed with the RPO, but the medical physics expert will be involved as well. And why is this? Because the medical physics expert in radiology or in nuclear medicine, they're going to be better placed to understand what the equipment does, its capabilities. They will also know how it will fit in a clinical environment. So the medical physicist will be involved in helping as well as with the shielding and such like. They will be involved in helping determine the equipment, the scanner that you might want for your installation. Of course, the medical physics expert as well, because they're closer to the clinical department, will understand better the patient flow. They will understand the requirements of anesthesia and patients coming in with beds. They will understand, how patients might need to wait in various areas. So they'll understand the operations of the department. So this is why the medical physics expert is key in the involvement in the shielding and installation design. And the operations type of thing you will do with the head of the technologists, of course, completely patient-focused. At the end as well, the medical physics expert will be involved in any equipment decommissioning. So, okay, we have our department. We've got our new equipment, either in radiology or in nuclear medicine. So what does the medical physicist get involved with next? Of course, it's the acceptance of that equipment and the quality control of the equipment. And we can think of equipment quality assurance of having 3 levels. There is the acceptance testing. So this is when the equipment comes in. The medical physicist should be there to make sure that the equipment performs as is expected. They will be involved in the commissioning, and what I mean by this is setting it up for clinical use. So working with the technologist to make sure that you have the protocols that you need and that they have been optimized. And then, of course, once the service starts, the medical physicist will be involved in the quality control with technologist support as well to do testing, periodic testing of their equipment to make sure that you spot any deficits in performance as early as possible and to really ensure that you've got ongoing, consistent, good quality performance of your radiology or nuclear medicine equipment. So what would quality control entail? Well, we know in X-ray and CT, we're often checking the X-ray tubes and the radiation outputs from those tubes. We'll be looking at the image quality coming from our X-ray and CT equipment. And looking generally, as a medical physicist, we look at the condition of the facility. Are the warning lights still working? Are the barriers, the shielding still in good working order? They haven't been damaged by things knocking into to the shielding. And in nuclear medicine, of course, in nuclear medicine, we tend to have a lot less equipment. But we tend to do more testing. I think in radiology, the quality control testing is relatively quick. You know, maybe in 30 minutes or 1 hour, you can test the equipment and move on. But in nuclear medicine, it generally requires more testing. So what are we doing? We're looking at image quality again. We may also need checks of our CT systems for our SPECT CT and PET CT scanners. And of course, nuclear medicine has a whole array of non-imaging equipment that we have as well. So the radionuclide calibrators needs to be within a quality control program. If you're doing sentinel node procedures, then you'll need to quality control your radiation probes. If you're doing GFRs, you'll be looking to quality control your sample counters. So there's a lot of equipment within nuclear medicine that needs to be under a quality control program. So the aim really, I just keep highlighting this, that really the aim of quality control, it's not to keep medical physicists in jobs. It's really to try and find any issues with our equipment as early as possible and try and minimize any disruption to the imaging service and to make sure the equipment is performing appropriately. Okay, so radiation protection again. You know, this is in addition to the work performed by the radiation protection officer. So there will be often local operational radiation protection in radiology and nuclear medicine departments, and the medical physics expert will be involved in that. They will develop with other staff members clinical radiation safety programs to make sure that patients, staff, and members of the public are safe. They will look at patient risk assessments, and I think this is more for nuclear medicine, where we might give patient radioactive materials and send them home. But at home they might have young children, or they might have people they need to care for. So we need to, as medical physicists, be involved in the risk assessment of the patient's family members. Of course, the patients themselves, we need to be aware and have procedures in place for pregnancy and breastfeeding, and be able to work out what we're going to do if they are breastfeeding, what the recommendations would be for the woman if they're pregnant. Do we look for help the doctor find alternative imaging procedures, or if the imaging is required, we will do a risk assessment and look to see the dose to the fetus as the medical physicist. Of course, pediatrics generally, we have an extra burden of care for our pediatric patients. And for radionuclide therapies, again, we have a whole bunch of risk assessments to do there when we're giving people radioiodine, for example, where the risk to friends and family are quite significant once they've left the nuclear medicine department. And generally, for the medical physicist working in radiology or nuclear medicine, their radiation protection duties are really to develop procedures to ensure the safe operation of equipment and radioactive sources as well. Okay, the incident investigation. Of course, things do go wrong, and the medical physicist will often be involved with the radiologist, the nuclear medicine physician, and maybe the technologist to work out what's going on. It's important, of course, to capture learning from events so that we can hopefully avoid a recurrence of this. And of course, as a medical physicist, we might need to determine the dose that the patient has accidentally or unintendedly received. We'll calculate that for the doctor and for any regulatory authorities. For example, if a dose was given and no dose was intended, or if an excessive dose was given, or if the wrong exam was chosen and the radiological consequence of that. And the medical physicist will be involved in trying to find any consistent systematic errors so that, again, we can learn and hopefully reduce the chances of recurrence. Of course, again, with pediatrics, we take extra levels of care when we have incidents involving them. Optimization in radiology and nuclear medicine. How does the medical physicist get involved? Well, again, their aim is to improve the image quality from the equipment, where it's all possible to minimize the patient dose. It's always that balancing act between not giving too much radiation, but getting the best quality that we need to make a diagnosis. So what's the optimization going to involve in X-ray and CT imaging? Well, for X-ray, it's quite simple. It's often on the tube parameters and exposure times, and having specific protocols for pediatrics. In CT imaging, of course, there's a whole bunch of extra factors that need to be optimized. And having the medical physicist involved with the nuclear medicine physician, the radiologist, and the technologist, it's really important to optimize these protocols to minimize dose and get the best image quality possible. And we know that these parameters can change quite significantly. And we also know that when we buy our scanners or our X-ray sets, our manufacturers will quite nicely give you a set of protocols already. But it's interesting, if you talk to these manufacturers, they will say, well, of course, we're not responsible for them. So they're giving you something, but if anything is not right, it's your fault. And often I think, the protocols that the manufacturers are giving you are often not optimized for your population. So, for example, we know many of our equipment manufacturers, produce for a very large American market. And we also know that our American cousins tend to be maybe a bit bigger than Europeans generally. So their protocols can be quite dosey. They can be quite high dose. So we shouldn't just accept that their protocols are appropriate for our populations. We should optimize locally with the technologists, with the nuclear medicine physicians, the radiologists, and with, of course, support from the company as well to make sure we're using all the tools that the technology offers. In nuclear medicine imaging, again, there's probably a little bit more to optimize here because, of course, it's not just the equipment we need to optimize. We've got to optimize the amount of radioactivity we give in terms of its the injected activity. Are we going to use fixed levels of injected activity? Are we going to base it on weight and give so many megabecquerels per kilogram? What are we going to do for our pediatrics? Normally, we should have tailored activities that we give for our pediatric patients. And then with the acquisition, of course, we have choices there. We have various collimators. We have choices on pixel voxel size, scan duration, and if it's PET scanning also on the overlap we might choose. We have choices on the reconstruction, similar to with CT. And of course, as I said before, often our nuclear medicine equipment now comes with CT, SPECT CT, PET CT. So again, we need to optimize, first understand what we're using the CT for. Are we using it just for attenuation correction, or are we going to use it for diagnosis? Because of course, the optimized parameters then will change depending on its use. Are we going to use contrast? How do we optimize the use of contrast? And I think we mentioned already in this conference about diagnostic reference levels, and I think it's just important to remind ourselves about these. You know, optimization, this process of optimization allows us to set some diagnostic reference levels. And you remember that these DRLs are defined in international medical exposure guidance. And really what we're doing with the DRLs, this isn't a maximum minimum. The DRL is there as a warning level. So if you have optimized your protocol and you've got a DRL and you were routinely exceeding that DRL, then it gives you a reason to investigate why that is. Maybe the optimization wasn't correct. Maybe things have changed. Maybe your staff, you've got new staff that maybe haven't had the training required. So this is what the DRL is for. It's an investigation level. It's not a limit. But it offers other advantages as well, because of course, when we have these measurements, then we can compare with our colleagues in other hospitals, in other institutions. So are we an outlier? Are we doing the same thing as our colleagues? Hopefully we are. We don't want to be an outlier. We want to conform when it comes to our radiation exposures. Of course, nuclear medicine isn't just about imaging, it's therapy as well. And we had a little conversation about this yesterday, that often nuclear medicine is given as fixed activity, but there is a move to optimize and personalize therapies based on dosimetry and dose estimates. A little contentious, we said yesterday, funding isn't there, but maybe it's the right thing to do. And if it was radiotherapy, external beam, we would always do dosimetry. So why don't we do it in nuclear medicine? I don't know. So yeah, optimization is also there in nuclear medicine therapy as well. Okay, so we're quite a way through our areas that the medical physicist gets involved in now. So let's look at the next area, which is surveillance and audit. And again, we've talked already quite a bit about audit, but what does this mean in an imaging environment? Well, of course, some of it's about our working environment. You know, we're dealing with hazardous materials or with ionizing radiation, which is hazardous, and we have put protection in place, but we need to survey to make sure that the safety mechanisms are being appropriately used and the appropriate procedures are being followed. So I'll give you an example. In my institution, we put in a new scanner, and we had a door to the control room where the technologists sat. And that technologist had lead shielding. It was in a PET suite. And the technologist didn't like the door because it was heavy. So we made it, so they left it open, which of course was a bit pointless because we needed to use the lead in the door to protect them. So then we motorized the door, hoping it would help them. And of course, then they didn't want to wait for the door to open and close, so they still left the door open. And we didn't know about this because, of course, they don't tell you that leaving the door open. We found by surveying and realizing that there was a problem when we had to resolve it. So yeah, we can look at audit to look at our staff exposures. So this is looking at staff exposures from PET CTs. We can audit as well, obviously for nuclear medicine. We deal with radioactive substances, so we want to monitor our areas. We want to look at personal contamination, and we might want to audit that as well to make sure that individuals or areas aren't getting contaminated more than others. And of course, audit and surveillance goes to radiation safety on the patient side as well. You know, what are the radiation exposures that we're giving to our patients? Are our processes and procedures being followed? You know, again, we can look at our doses, see if they're optimized, and compare with our colleagues at other institutions. Quality assurance. So now I'm talking about quality assurance of procedures rather than equipment. It is really important that we have these procedures and we just don't leave them on the shelf and don't look at them again for 10 years. We've got to make sure that we're keeping up to date with guidance that might be coming out, make sure they're still contemporary. And of course, the last area is in training and development. And as medical physicists, we're experts in the use of radiation, so we can help train our doctors, our technologists. We may have nurses that come into our department, so we can help train them, or surgeons, maybe if they're involved with nuclear medicine procedures or even radiological procedures, tell them, you know, give them the safety lowdown. And of course, in a hospital as well, we have visiting staff that we need to look after as well. We do have cleaning staff, we do have maintenance staff, we might have visiting academics. So we've got to, as medical physicists, train them and make sure they know the safety, the radiation safety things for them to be safe in their area. And the development process, of course, medical physicists are scientists. You know, we want to change, we want to renew, and I think most people in imaging departments want to as well, as in radiotherapy. So we really need to have process for introducing new procedures and just not allow them to be brought in by an individual who thinks it'd be a good idea to do something. We need to, if we bring in new procedures, we need to have quality assurance around them, and as medical physicists, we'll be involved in supervising their implementation. And what have I got? This diagram here, I've got obviously some X-ray, some nuclear medicine, imaging and radiotherapy. I think for those of you who know about medical physicists in radiotherapy, what I'm explaining here is exactly the same. You know, the medical physicist role is effectively covering all these same areas. It's just that I've been showing you what they're doing in imaging as opposed to in therapy. Just to finish off a little bit, there are also medical physicists who don't get involved in radiation. So in MRI and in ultrasound, in some computing, clinical scientific computing. So if you're designing software to help patient investigations. And of course, in clinical engineering as well, you might find that you have a maintenance team for your equipment, and they will have medical physicists in there as well. Okay, I've talked about a lot here. If you're looking at reading materials, I suggest you look through these IEA documents. There's a paper there as well about the training of medical physicists too in nuclear medicine. Something came up yesterday, and maybe I want to stir up a bit of argument or discussion about how many medical physicists we need. And okay, I don't care about radiotherapy, that's for radiotherapy, but for imaging I do care. And the IEA have got guidance there which will tell you how many medical physicists they think you need. And of course, EFOMP as well, the European Federation of Medical Physicists, also have guidance to tell you how many medical physicists they think you should have in imaging departments. I'm not saying they're good or bad, but I think they're worth a read to see if you agree, disagree. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with both of these documents, but they're a useful resource anyway. And of course, the other document that you can read is the roles and responsibilities of medical physicists, which covers radiotherapy, but also covers diagnostic radiology and nuclear medicine physicists. Thank you for listening.